So I will say, let's turn to Daf Zayin and Beis, and we're going to learn a little bit about what's called Shiluach Tmeim Min HaMachne on the top of Daf Zayin and Beis, about 6 or 7 lines down from the top. See how this ties back into our sugi. So the Torah says at the beginning of Sefer Bamidbar, Perek Hey, it says, Tzaves B'nei Yisrael, V'yishalchu min hamachne kol tzarua v'chol zav v'chol tomi lenefesh. And the Sugya Masechet Pesachim divides up the machnos into 3 different machnos. They're very famous. It's called Machne Shechina, Machne Levia, Machne Yisrael. So Machne Shechina is what we call the Azara. And all the Tmeim, every single Tameh, even the lowest on the echelon of Tumah as we go through the pyramid, are excluded from the Azara, which is called the Machne Shechina. And when we say the lowest on the totem pole, that's called a Tameh Sheret. So somebody came in contact with the Sheret. We'll see about Tumas Mes is a little bit more complicated. In any event, now we have something called Machne Levia. Machne Levia is the Harabayis. From the Harabayis all the way up to the Azara. Now, the boundary or the border between Harabayis and the Azara is called Shar Nikanor. So anything from the Harabayis up until Shar Nikanor is called the Machne Levia. Now, in the case of a Machne Levia, then we're going to exclude other Tmeim who are more Chum. Their Tumah is called a Tumah Chamura. For example, we have something called Tumah Hayotzeis Migufa, like Zav, Zava, Yoledes, or for example, of Al-Keri. All of those Tumos are called Tumah Chamura in the sense that we have to get rid of these people. They can't enter into the Harabais at all. And then, so now, this is very relevant today for those who dream about going on to Harabais. What's the status of a Tameh Mes? A Tameh Mes is definitely excluded from the Azara. Whether it's excluded from the Harabais, otherwise known as the Machne Levia, that depends on Doraisa and Rabban. On a Doraisa level, it's not a Tumah Yotzes Migufa. I had contact with the Mes, but there's nothing coming out of my group. But on a Drabbana level, the Rabbanan established that Tameh Mes, they upgraded Tameh Mes to a level of Tumah Chamura, which means Tumah Yotzes Migufa, and therefore Tameh Mes is excluded from the Harabais. Okay. Now we get to the most serious or intense Tumah, and that is a Tumah which has to be, right, a Mitzvah, which has to be excluded from the 3rd level of Tumah, which is called Machne Yisrael. Now, what is Machne Yisrael? So we have Machne Shechina, which is the Azara. We have Machne Levi, which is the Harabayis. And then we get to the wider circle, which is called Machne Yisrael. Machne Yisrael, we usually, but I think it's a mistake, we tend to identify Machne Yisrael as Yerushalayim. But the truth is that any city in Eretz Yisrael that is what's called Mukefes Chom, the Mos Yoshua, is called Machne Yisrael. So that a Mitzorah would have to be excluded from any city, of course, Yerushalayim, and any city in Israel that is Mukefes Chom. Now, all this is at the beginning of Masechet Kelim. That's where he's quoting it from. Okay, now, life becomes more complicated because between Tahar and Tameh, there are a number of stages. You could be partially Tameh, but not totally Tameh. Until now, we were classifying different categories of Tumah. Now we're talking about Tumah itself. So, for example, there's a Tameh who has not yet gone into a mikveh. He wasn't Tovel yet. He's a full-fledged Tameh. That's like 100%. Then you could have a tamei that went into a mikvah, but he needs what's called hariv shemesh. We have to wait until that day passes. So his status between the moment that he comes out of the mikvah and the moment of sunset is that of a tvul yom. Okay. Now, as far as the tvul yom is concerned, he is prohibited from eating kachim and truma, but he's allowed to eat chul. So you see that already he is in this middle of a state. Now, as far as Biol Tocha Migdash is concerned, if he wants to enter into the Migdash, then we have to wait until Hariv Shemesh, until Lila. It's not enough that he went into the mikvah. And it's not enough until what? Until Hariv Shemesh. So Kvar Toval, now we're up to the next stage. Not only did he have Tvila in a mikvah, not only did he also have Hariv Shemesh, but he's a Mechusar Kapara. Now there are four categories of Mechusar Kapara. That's Zav, Zava, Yoledes, and Mitzorah. And they need a third element in the process of purification, and that's bringing their karbanos. That can only happen the next day because Migdash is closed for business at night. So you've had Tefillah on that day, you've had Hariv Shemesh going into the night, and now we need Mechusar Kapara, we need to bring the karbanos. And Mechusar Kapara are allowed to eat not only chulin, but also truma, but not kodshim, and they cannot enter into the Beis Hamikdash. So the only way they can bring a korban is that we will allow them to come up to, let's say, the borderline of the Azara, and that's how they give over their korban over to the Kohen. So therefore, b'chusik kaparim also b'knisa le'machne shchina, which we said is the Azara, and a Tvul Yom didn't even have Hariv Shemesh for sure. With a Kal V'chomer, he's not allowed into the Azara. Okay. Now, what about the Harabayis, which is called the Machne Levia? The Machne Levia is not relevant to someone who's Mechusar Kapar, means he's already been Tovel immersed in the mikveh, he's already had Hariv Shemesh, he's allowed into the Harabais, he cannot enter into the Azar. Okay, now we need one more introduction and then we're ready in Mirza Hashem for our Gemara. What is the Seder of the purification and the Tara of a Mitzorah? So first of all, which we're not going to get into, we have to determine that he's no longer suffering. He doesn't have the dermatological phenomenon. And, clinically, he's not a Mitzorah. So he's Misrape, he's already past that stage. Okay. Now what happens? So what's unique about it, there are a few things about a Mitzorah that are very, very unique. And one thing is what's called Shtei Tziporim. He's got to bring two birds. Very, very strange ritual. The first bird is going to be shechted, and we're going to take the dam and do a hazah. Okay, we'll see about the laws of hazah as we go along. The second tzipor is sent free. That's called shiluach hatzipor. We just send it into the air. Okay, so that's the first stage in the process of Taras HaMitzvah. Now the second stage is what's called Giluach. Giluach means Megalchim es kol si'ara. Okay, we have to shave off all his hair. Now we're ready for stage 3, which is Tvila in a mikveh. Okay, so this is his first tefillah. Now he counts 7 days, and on the 7th day, he repeats 2 out of the 3 of the processes. He needs, number 1, giluach. Number 2, again, there's not that much to shave off, but he needs a giluach. And number 2, he needs another tefillah. So this is tefillah number 2, Roman numeral number 2. And now his status on the 7th day is equal to that of a tefillah yom. So he waits until Hariv Shemesh. With Hariv Shemesh, he becomes tahar, but he's still a mechusa kapara. So he's allowed to eat truma, but he's not allowed to eat kachim, nor can he enter into the mikdash. So that's called a mechusa kapara. And the following next day, which is the 8th day from, if you calculate from his first tefillah, now he brings his karbanos, and we're going to see he brings 3 different karbanos, but we're going to focus our attention now on one of those 3, which is called the karban asham. Now, in the process of bringing the karban asham, the dam of the asham requires what's called matan bahonos. This is the most strange part of mitzorah, of taras mitzorah, which means that the Kohen takes the dam of the asham and he does a matan damim on bahonos yadav viraglov hayaminian, on his right hand, his right thumb, and his right big toe of the mitzorah, and on the right earlobe of the mitzorah, which is called tnuch ozno hayimanis. I mean, all this is doraisa. This is not these are not rabbinic inventions. We spoke about it Talmud Mes as far as the Arabayis is concerned, but now we're talking about the kapara process, which cleanses the tara of a mitzorah. Okay. Now here's the problem that Mitch mentioned before. The matan damim of bahonos yadav raglav has to take place in the Azor, but he's a mechusa kapara until after the matan damim. He's not allowed to enter into the Azor. So what do we do right now when we talk about the Azor? We mean what's called the Ezras Yisrael. On the eastern side of the Ezras Yisrael is called the Ezras Noshim, and that doesn't have the status of Machne Shechina. It has the status of Machne Levia. Is Hamitzorah Nichnas li Ezras HaNoshim Umoshit es Bahonosav L'toch Ezras Yisrael. So physically, he's located outside the Azor, the Ezras Noshim, but his thumbs have entered into the Ezras Noshim, and that's okay. Sharei im yotziu es hadam michutz li Ezras Noshim. Now, you might ask, why not just do the Matan Bahonos in the Ezras Noshim? And the answer is that as soon as you take the dam out of the Ezras Yisrael, that's called Yotze. This is the overlap between Kodshim and Taras, because now we have a Kodshim halacha. The dam of a carbon, if it's taken outside of its mechitzos, which is usually outside the Azara, that's for Kodshim, which in Oshim is Kodshim, then it becomes possible. Dam nifsal biyotze. We need dam that's kosher for the purpose of matan bahonos. And finally, kodem shenishla akrovas hakarbanos adayinu mechusa kapara the asli kanis lemachne shechina. He still has not brought his karbanos or completed the process of his karbanos, and therefore he's not allowed to enter into the machne shechina and mechusa kapara. So therefore, he cannot enter into the Machne Yisrael. Now, I'm sorry, into the Ezras Yisrael. So we're in a bind over here. We can't take the dam out of the Ezras Yisrael. That would passel the dam bidin yotze. We cannot allow the mitzvah to enter into the Azara because he's a mechusa kapar. He's not allowed to enter into the Azara. So therefore, what do we do? Omed bitoch sha'arei Nikanor. So the right? The walls on both sides, the right and the left side of the entranceway, the gate, we'll call it a gate, which is called the Char Nikanor, they are considered bachutz. What do I mean bachutz? They don't have the din of azara, but only when you enter beyond the entranceway into the azara, that's when you're in the azara. So now the mitzora is standing at the entranceway. He has not entered into the azara yet. And that's fine. Because then he's in the Machna Leviyah. Umisha. Now, while he's standing in the Shar Nikanor, Hayamoshit Espahonosav Litoch Azara, Yidei Sheyitnu Aleim Hakohen Min Adam. He Al Afsha Hoyu Shari Nikanor Psuchim Li Ezras Yisrael Lo Iskachu B'Kedushas Hazara. Now, normally, when you build a structure that opens into a place that's endowed with Kedusha, that structure, right? You build a gate into the structure. That gate itself, because it opens inside to the Kodesh, is also sanctified. So therefore, how can we allow the Mitzorah for the purpose of Matan Bahonos to stand in the Shara Nikanor, which are open into the Ezras Yisrael? What the halacha is that lo is kadshu b'kedushas hazara. They made the exception for the sake of the Mitzorah that the Shar Nikanor would not be sanctified. When they built the Shar Nikanor, they made this condition that the airspace in between the two sides of this entranceway of this gate will not be sanctified, and therefore the area in the open space as you enter into the Shar Nikanor has the status of Ezras Noshim, not Ezras Yisrael, but Ezras Noshim, which is Kemachna Leviyah, and a Mechusa Kapar is allowed to go into the Machna Leviyah. Okay. Now we're ready to start our Gemara. Isanya. Okay, do we have the place? We're on Daf Zayin Amud Beis, and we are now about 10 lines down. Kind of smack in the middle of the page. It's a short page, right? So you see the word Ve'ishtere. Now, the last thing that we spoke about on Yom Chamishi was a principle called Hol Ve'ishtere Ishtere. And this is going to justify the pasuk of Aleha to exclude Yibum in the case of Achos Ishto, because logically, if not for that exclusion, if not for that Yalfusa, we would have said that since the Torah was matir one erva, in this case Eshes Ach, then the Torah will be matir another erva, in this case Achos Ishto, when two brothers are married to two sisters. And that's the principle of Hol V'Ishtrei Ishtrei. We're now going to see if we can find a source for this principle called Hol V'Ishtrei Ishtrei. Mitzora Shechal Yom Shmini Shalo, the Erev Pesach. So the 8th day since and remember that we calculated from the first Tvila, he now on that 8th day has to bring his karbanos. And it's a desperate situation because he needs to be kind of the mitzvah of karban pesach. So right now he's a mechusa kapara until he brings his karbanos, and it's Erev Pesach. Now it becomes more complicated. The Ra Keri Bo Bayom. He is now also a Bal Keri. So as far as Tumas Soras is concerned, he's already up to the 8th day. He's already had 2 Tvilos. He's already had Heriv Shemesh. He's only missing his Karban on the morning of the 8th. But now he saw Keri. Now, the law of Keri is that you're Tovel on that same day, and you have the status of a Tvul Yom. You have to wait until the nighttime, until your Tumah has removed itself. Now, so the Tefillah during the day is not enough. It only starts the process. Okay, now, we said that the Matan Domim of a Mitzorah will take place when the Mitzorah stands in the Ezras Noshim, which has the status of the Machna Leviyah, and he extends his fingers into the Ezras Yisrael. Okay. Now, what's the halacha of about Keret? So I think we said, I just want to remind myself one more time that, where is it here again? Yeah. A Tful Yom is Tameh as far as Bias Migdosh is concerned. How are we going to pull this off? Is he allowed to go into the Ezras Noshim, which is the Machna Leviyah? Let's go over it one more time. The Machna Leviyah, when do we require Shiluach from Machna Leviyah? We said even any Tumah Yotzis Migufa, correct? So Bal Keri, L'chora, should be excluded from Machna Leviyah. Is it full Yom? Yeah, full Yom is not allowed to enter into the Machna Leviyah. Because as far as Bias Migdash is concerned, he's still considered Tameh. So if we would only focus on his Tumas Tzaras is concerned, he's okay. Because once we get to the 8th day, he's already had Tefillah and Harav Shems. He's no longer Tvul Yom. So he can't enter into the Machna Shechina, but he can enter into the Machna Leviyah, but that's not true for a Tvul Yom. And in this case that he saw Keri Bo Bayom and Erev Pesach, he's a Tvul Yom, even after he goes to the mikveh. So how is he going to be Matayr himself from Tumas Tzara? That's where I'm up to. I mean, that's the confusing point. So V'Toval. So now he wants to be Matayr himself from Tumas Keri. This is already the third tefillah for this guy. Right? Now the question is, can he enter into the Machna Leviyah, or otherwise here in this context, the Ezras Noshim, in order to be Makabel Adam on his Bahonas and be Matayr himself? Afal pi she'ein Tvul Yom acher nichnas. So if we apply the universal standard as far as Machna Leviyah is concerned, a Tvul Yom is not allowed to enter into the Machna Leviyah. There's no way that this Mitzorah as a Tvul Yom could receive Matan Bahonos. But this one, Zed Nichnas, for the sake of Matan Bahonos, of the Dam of the Karban Osham, we're going to allow it. And the reason for this, I believe, is because of the mitzvah of Karban Pesach. I don't know how you're going to be matus. I don't know the mechanism. He says, "Kevon shim lo yikonis lemachna leviyah, idei sheyitnu es hadam al baonosav lo yuchal lechol balaylas pisko." In other words, as far as the hakrav of the Karban Pesach is concerned, he's part of a chabura. He can appoint whoever it is to be his representative. He doesn't have to enter into the azor. But as far as eating kachim is concerned, he's enjoined from eating kachim as a mechusar kapara. So he's going to eat the Karban Pesach at night. Right, we're on the 14th of Nisan. Tonight is the 15th of Nisan. And he's got to eat the Karban Pesach. It's a chiv kares. Yet he's a mechusa kapara who's not allowed to eat kachin. And Basar Pesach is kachin. So how are we going to allow him to get out of his tumas tzaras if he's not allowed to enter into the Machne Leviyah in order to extend his fingers, into the Machne Yisrael? Mutav sheyavo essay. Here's the mechanism, and the essay here is Pesach. Sheyesh bo kares, v'yidche essay she'ein bo kares. Okay, now we have another complicated element in this equation. We said that a Tvul Yom is not allowed to enter into the Machne Leviyah. Correct? He can't enter into the Machne Leviyah. This man is a Tvul Yom because of Keri. But if he were to enter into the Machne Leviyah, then he violates an essay. Interesting, there's no losas there. But Shiluach Machnos is an essay, and this essay is an essay she'ein bo karet. So we have an absolute mutually exclusive conflict there between two essays. One essay is the essay of eating the Korban Pesach, and the other essay is Shiluach min Machne Leviyah in the case of a Mechusa Kapara. I'm sorry, in the case of a Tvul Yom. Again, V'toras Mechusa Kapara can enter into the Machne Leviyah, but V'toras Tvul Yom, because of his carry, he's in violation of an essay of Shiluach min HaMachne if he enters into the Machne Leviyah, which is the Ezras Nashim. But on the other hand, if he doesn't enter in to the Ezras Nashim, there's no possibility of completing his purification with Matan Bahonos to allow him to eat kachin, because the Mechusa Kapara is not allowed to eat kachin. He won't be able to eat the Korban Pesach. And the mitzvah of Korban Pesach is what kind of mitzvah? Kares. As a sheish kares. It's like the means justify the ends here. We're gonna sacrifice a lower echelon essay of Shiluach min HaMachne for the sake of a greater essay, which is an essay sheish bo kares. Now the language is Amru Chachamim. I don't know what that means. Amru Chachamim, is that a Takanas Chachamim? And the Chachamim are exercising some special authority that they have, whereas Amru Chachamim, this is the way the Chachamim ruled in this case. That's what I think it means. Amru Chachamim. So again, when we're talking about a Tvul Yom, and the problem is that a Tvul Yom is not allowed to enter into what? Into the Machne Leviyah. Again, if he enters into the Machne Shechina, that's a chiyuv karetz. That's no doubt about that. But we're not asking him to do that. We can pull off Matan Bahonos without having him enter into the Machne Shechina by standing at the Sharon Nikanah and extending his fingers into the Azor. But for him as a Balkari, who's a Tvul Yom, to enter into the Machne Leviyah, that itself is a violation of an essay, albeit without a chiyuv karetz. Wow, I mean, this is a doozy. I mean, you really have to know. I mean, without the Masifta, I would be lost here. Got to know so much. Again, as far as the laws of Korban Pesach is concerned, he doesn't have to enter into the Azor. He can send a shliach to bring the Korban Pesach. But as far as Achilas Korban Pesach, there's no shlichus in Achilas Korban Pesach. And in the evening, after he has Harav Shemesh, he becomes tar from Tumas Kerio, and he's allowed to eat from the Pesach as far as Tumas Keri is concerned, but he's not allowed to eat from the Korban Pesach as far as Tumas Mitzorah is concerned, because he's Mechusa Kapara, unless we're going to allow this Mitzorah / Balkeri, who's now a Tvul Yom, to enter into the Machne Leviyah to receive, right after Shara Niknor, and receive the Matan Bahonos to complete his Tara, so that tonight he will be able to sit down with us and eat the Korban Pesach. The Omer Rabbi Yochanan comments on this brayso. Because the Brisa says, Yidche esse shein bo kares. Says Rabbi Yochanan, Dvar Torah, afilu esse lespe. You take the language of the Brisa literally, you'll come to a mistaken conclusion. Because we're talking about its full yom, and we're talking about the Machna Leviyah. The exclusion of its full yom from Machna Leviyah is not even an essence. It's only Machna Shechina that the Torah biblically is excluded from, but not Machna Leviyah. The entire enterprise of Tful Yom being excluded from the Ezras Nashim, from Machna Leviyah, is all the Rabbanon. How do we know this? In Nemar, we know it from a Pasuk in Tanakh, in Divrei Hayom. Now, this is the case where Klal Yisrael became tar from all sorts of kinds of tumah that they had. And the Pasuk testifies, Vayamod Yoshafat b'kahal Yehuda l'fnei hachatzer chadasha. What does this mean? The Gemara asks, can he explain to me, what is chatzer chadasha? Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Now there's another girsa here that says Amar Rebbe. Not sure. Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of support in favor of this girsa Rebbe. And Rebbe says that this Chatzer Chadasha is none other than the Harabayis. And why is it called Chadasha? Shechichu ba dvar. And that they, meaning the Chachamim, exercising their authority of making Siagim and Gzeros, they were Machadish Dvar. They came up with a new Gzera. What was their new Gzera? This is Rebbe's interpretation. Amru, they said, they declared Tful Yom lo yikaris l'machna leviyah. So now that the whole Iser for its full Yom entered into the Machna Leviyah, meaning the Ezras Nashim in our context, is only a rabbinic Gzera. Therefore, we have a principle, Lo hamidu chachamim divreim makom kares. They're not going to institute this Gzera in a case of a Mitzora who saw a Keri, that he can't go into the Machna Leviyah, meaning the Shar Nikanor in our context, until nighttime. We don't want to be mavatal him from the mitzvah of Korban Pesach, which is, together with Milah, the only two mitzvahs that generate kares. If you don't fulfill those mitzvahs. The only thing that bothers me here about this sugya is what happened to Pesach Sheni? It's an interesting question. Do we have to do somersaults in the air for the sake of a tameh in order to facilitate his ability to eat from the Korban Pesach on the 15th of Nisan, on the night of the 15th, when we can just as simply say, wait another month? Okay, that's a question that crosses my mind. Okay. So again, the key word here is the Amru. The Amru, meaning they made a Gzera, they stated that Tful Yom lo yikaris l'machna leviyah. And Rabbi Yochanan is medayik from the words of Rebbe, v'lo Amru, the Amru, that this whole Easter is only the Rabban. So we're going to violate this Easter, or shall we say the Chacham are going to step aside for the sake of the mitzvah d'oraisa of Korban Pesach, which is the mitzvah of kares. We don't want him to be mevatel from bringing, or in this case, bringing and eating the Korban Pesach. Take a look, for example, at Tosfos Dirmaskal Muta, third of the wide line, very wide lines. He says, Lav milsat b'psika. This is not an absolute rule. Yesh makomos, we find cases, she'amidu divreim b'makom kares. And he quotes the Sugim Psach. Elikan loya nir l'chachamim lahach. Okay, it doesn't really tell you much, but we should know that this is not an absolute hardcore rule that always applies. The Omar Ulo, I'm not exactly sure why do we need Ulo? I mean, is there anything that we don't understand at this point? Mitch, what do you have in your commentary there on the words? Do you have any commentary on Omar Ula? Because I'm a little perplexed here. Usually Omar Ula means I'll answer a question. I don't know that there's a question.
As Ula has talking partial entry.
In other words, this whole business about putting your fingers in is a problem according to Ula. You mean is that what's bothering us?
I think so.
All right, let me digest that. Let me think about that. There's this whole trick about standing in the Shari Nikanor and extending his hands in. That doesn't sit well with Ula because it's via b'miktzas. And via b'miktzas shmei b'biyah, according to Ula. That's the Sugin's book. Just see if it tells you where in this book. No, it's in what? Where? Lamed Beis. Okay. In my Gemara, doesn't tell you where it is. I had a different idea here, but let me think about it. In the Brisa, it says mutav sheyovo esse sheyesh bo kares v'yidche esse she'ein bo kares. Maybe that's bothering Uli, because according to Rabbi Yochanan, this whole institution of an Easter for him to go into the Machal Leviyah is only the Rabbana, correct? How could the Brisa use the terminology v'yidche esse she'ein bo kares? And when it's full yom, it enters into the Machne Shechina, there's no kares, but it is a violation of an essence. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan is saying that there's no violation of an essence. Because look, he's saying the Amru, they said, meaning the Rabbanan instituted that full yom lo yikonis the Machne Leviyah. But the Torah allowed him to go into the Machne. So both, are you with me on this? I'm just trying to say the following, that what's the Omar Ula? Ula is coming to reconcile the language of the Brisa with Rabbi Yochanan. Because Rabbi Yochanan clearly, based on Rebbe, comes to the conclusion that the entire institution of a Tful Yom not entering into the Machal Leviyah is a Drabanan. And Ula faces now the problem because the Brisa calls it an Essay Shemo Kares. Let's see if it works. The Omar Ula Matam. What's the logic that compels us to allow a Tful Yom to enter into what? Not to enter into the, as you said, Steve, not to enter into the Machne Leviyah. That's not a problem. But the problem is he's really entering into the Machne Shechina because he extends his hands in. It's Orato, Utul. I mean, this is the punchline of the whole sugya here, but let's see if we can figure it out. He says that as far as a mitzvah is concerned, right, he's not allowed to enter into the Machne Shechina. Okay. Why? Because a mechusa kapara, we said, is not allowed to enter into the machna shechina. Yeah, but here he's not going into the machna shechina. Just 1 second. Because Ula holds that bia b'miksa shmei bia. So when he extends his fingers into the azara, then he's a mechusa kapara who entered into the machna shechina and he violates the nisakaris.
Or is it to hold no?
Because it says here, Huter Litzarato. I'm trying to think.
He didn't have a carry. The link.
Oh, yeah?
That's preventing him from carry. So he's saying he's, plus he could have gone in. Hold up. And allow him.
So we're dealing with 3 different Gemaras. So I'm going to read some more Gemara.
He has a bit.
Let me just read you my Gemara, and then we'll, obviously it's more complicated. He says, Gam machmas tumas tzarato, asur lo aknisa la zora be'isa kares. Because of a chusa kapara, again, I'm just presenting, I can't evaluate it right now because I don't have the wherewithal, but he's saying that a mechusa kapara cannot enter into the Ezras Yisrael, meaning to the Azora, the Machna Shechina, without violating an Isur Kares. Why? He says, Shekain af mechusa kippurim, anush kares, al kach, kach meaning entering into the Machna Shechina. Umitzora, Kodem Shenitar, who had 9 mechusa kippurim. I don't know exactly what he means by that. Kodem Shenitar, meaning he did everything except for bringing his korbanos. All right, whatever. Ume'achar shehutar lo iser knisa sheyesh betumas tzaras gam hutar lo iser knisa machmas tumas hakeri. This is what we're trying to get to, this principle called hold the ishtra from Hach to achos ishna, right? So he's saying that there was a heter over here that they were matir for a mechusa kapara to enter into the machna shechina. But he's not entering into the machna shechina unless, again, we're going with Ula. Again, just the words. First, the word. He's saying since they were matir tumas tzaras when he's not allowed into the azara, and again, I assume that the fingers is therefore they were matir ne'achar shehutalo isa knisa b'tumas tzaras gam hutalo isa knisa machmas tumas hakeri. He has a footnote here. It says Achen gam im lo toval b'kanis v'yotam. This is on me. So again, he writes a summary. He says, "Harein lanu." What do we derive from this? Ki kol dover shecholu olav shnei isurim im huter echad mehem nitar gama isra sheni hamitzuruf elo. V'hu haklal ha'omer lamala hol v'ishtei ishtei. Al pi klal ze yesh lahatir gam achos isha liyibum mishum shahoel v'huter isra eshes ach huter gam Iser achos ishta. V'lakach hutzach l'mayit es kol harayis liyivu midrashas olem. Sheroa Kerry. I don't know now. So that was the Masechet. I mean, again, the Pella here is it doesn't shock me that a Mechusa Kapora is Chayiv Karis if he enters into the Machna Shechina. That part of the Masifta I can explain. But how are they matir? That you've got Karis of Pesach, you got Karis of entering into the Azorah. He says once they were matir in B'Toras Mitzorah, they were matir already B'Toras Balkari as its full yom. But why were they matir from Mitzorah? That I'm missing. You have anything there?
What we said earlier, I mean, that's the only way to.
No, we said earlier that we thought he was standing in the Shar Nikanor, and he never entered into the Machna Shechina. That's how we understood it. But if Ula doesn't understand it, because he has to extend his fingers inside the Ezras Noshim, right. So then Taka, why is that put? I mean, you're violating Issa Karetz. I mean, what birdie whispered into your ear from the heavens that you're allowed to do that?
But then,
so
it's possible ever to become Tahar on Shem Mitzvah. It's.
I see what he's saying. Forget about Korban Pesach.
Right.
No, in other words, this is not a heter for the sake of Korban Pesach. Excellent. Okay, that was what I missed. And since that's built into the process of Tara of Matan Bahonos, there's just no other solution to this problem. So obviously, for the sake of Matan Bahonos, the Torah was matir what normally would have been in Isakares, at least according to Ula. And now we're going to be matir an entry of a Tful Yom into the Machne Shechina because of the whole Vishtri Yisra. Yeah, but I don't understand. We're only allowing that for the sake of the Korban Pesach. Brisa says, "Mutav sheyavo esei sheishbo kares, v'yidche esei she'emo kares," which means that for a Tful Yom to go into the Machna Shechina, that's not an Issa Kares, but he's assuming Ula that it is an Issa Kares. Ma'atam, how do they allow a Tful Yom to enter into the Asara? Huta l'tzarato is Huta l'keri. Forget about Erev Pesach. I don't get it. The whole year round. Why shouldn't the same? Yeah, let's see what Rabbi Steinzel says. He's obviously going with a different approach. Good. Read out loud if you don't mind.
That's in holy power of Yochanan. At no same time,
Okay.
Nira, Yochanan Moshe, Svirim Shaula Bon Osif, Asbir Esad. Ula Tanos, Amru, Yesh Kan Shnei Chalot Hete. Echad, Atros Mitzvah, Anis Nos Rasnosh, Alech Acher, Achnosas, Abaonos. Adai Eyo Koro, Shaula Shova, Mitzvahs, Shmaitain, and also Adai Eyo. Down the
Wait, so what I understand so far is that we need two heter as far as the mitzvah is concerned. One heter is to allow him to enter into the Machna Levia, and that's the Drabbana. That's what Rabbi Yochanan was dealing with, right? When Rabbi Yochanan quoted Rebbe, he wanted to prove from that pasuk in Divrei Yamin that as far as the Chatzar Chadosha, and the Chatzar Chadosha has the status of Machna Levia, Hichu Badvar, Right? The pasuk says Chatzer Chadasha, meaning Chidshim Bo Dvarim. So simply to allow the Mitzorah to enter into the Machna Leviyah, that itself is a heter on a drabanan level. Okay. Now comes along Ula, and either he's disagreeing with Rabbi Yochanan or just embellishing Rabbi Yochanan, whichever way. And he's saying, wait a minute, we need a second heter, and that is to extend his hands into the Ezras Noshi. Because if we hold Bia b'miksa shmei Bia, now we're dealing with an Isa Doraisa and even an Isa Karetz. And for that, we have to apply the logic of whole Vishtari Ishtar. That's wonderful. My only little problem, maybe it's just a small problem, is what does that have to do with Korban Pesach? Right, the entire Brisa here is talking about a Mitzvah Shechal Leo Shmini Shalo Be'erev Pesach. Just 1 second. Mutav Sheyovo Ese Yesh Bo Kares. Okay, that I understand. He wants to eat the Korban Pesach. Yitche Ese She'ein Bo Kares.
Wasn't about carrying, I know to do everything you need to. Now, the carry is stopping him from doing it. But instead of looking more than the Korban Pesach, comes carry, so come back tomorrow.
1 second. In other words, so when it says hold the Mutar Litzarato,
he would have been able to bring it.
He means because of Pesach? But just 1 second.
No,
I just want to read it again.
He was already set for us. He was ready to stick his hands in and get.
Anytime, the whole year. Okay. So now
he can't.
Now he can't because he has a carry. Oh, just 1 second. Because he's also at the same time at full yom because of the carry. Now, if he's at full yom, and Ula holds that what? That Bia b'miksa shmei Bia. So how are we going to allow it full yom to stand at the Shar Nikanor in the Machal Bia and enter virtually and enter into the Azor? What do we say? He did Mitzorah. What do we matter from Mitzorah? I mean, this Mitzorah does the whole year round. Yeah, so now we'll add what Steve said before. We're going to be matter the whole year round in the case of Mitzorah, because otherwise he has no possibility of Matan Domim, of Matan Bahonos to be Mitaris. The Torah must be allowing. Now we're going to say that even though he's also at the same time a Tzvul Yom on this area, and certainly he's not allowed to enter into the Azara, we're going to say, hold the Ishrei Ishrei. Since it's the whole year round, now we're going to be matter on Pesach. Does that make any sense? Doesn't sit well. Since we will be matter for Mitzorah the whole year round, we'll be matter even though now he's a Tzvul Yom, because we need him to bring the Korban Pesach. Again, if it wasn't Erev Pesach, then we would not allow it to enter into the Azara, even though he's a Mitzorah and he needs to do himself, let him wait a bit. But the pressing need here is because it's Erev Pesach, and therefore he's got to be retire himself with Matan Bahonos in order to facilitate the eating of the Korban Pesach. That we're going to allow based on this principle called Hol Ishtay, even though he's a full yom. Right. In other words, it works like this: that In terms of Torah, to be matir, that we can do the whole year round, then he puts his fingers into the Azora, and that's because that's the only way he can be matir himself. But now he's also Balkari. So who says that the Torah would allow a Balkari to enter into the Ezra's Hanosh, meaning to the Machashkin? How can we allow that? So the answer is we're looking for a heter desperately. We don't want to delay it. Normally we have the luxury of delaying it, but now we don't want it to lose out on a mitzvah of kares of Pesach. So what we're going to do is we're going to apply the principle of whole vishay, that since it's put to the whole year round, so you've already violated the iser of shiluach mimachne shchina in the case of the mitzoros and mechusa kapara. Now we can be matter even a full yom to enter into the machne shchina for the sake of the mitzvah korban pesach. So how does that fit into the language of the Brisa? I think that would be the clincher if we get that. Mutov sheyovo ese sheyesh bo kares yidche ese she'ein bo kares. Meaning that they're not entering into the machne shchina. So I have a feeling, I mean, you're going to laugh me out of the ballpark here, that even Ula, who says bia b'mitzah shmei bia, he's not elevating it to the state of full-fledged bia, meaning there are three categories. There's someone who's completely outside the machne shchina, someone who's completely inside the machne shchina. That's a chiyuv kares. And then you have someone who's straddling both sides of the fence. He is outside of the machne shchina, but he puts part of his body into the machne shchina. He is considered violating shiluach min hamachne, but without a chiyuv kares. And the nafkamina is going to be this situation where he's a mitzora, and we need him to put his fingers into the azara, and he's at full yom. So he's violating shiluach min hamachne, because the machne shchina doesn't tolerate even part of the body of the full yom, but will be marked at that because it's not a chiyuv kares for the sake of the korban pesach. But in and of itself, so if what I'm saying is right, I mean, I'm making a leap of faith here. So why do I need the additional spara of whole ishtrei? Because, I mean, obviously in this case, it's true that whole ishtrei, because the Torah was matir the mitzora to enter into the machne shchina in that way with bia b'mikzas. Otherwise, like you said, there'd be no possibility. So that's really true. That's emes. But is that what contributes to the psak of the brisa, that even though he's a balkari and he's a full yom, we will allow him to receive matan bahonos for the sake of the korban pesach? If what I said is true, that there's no chiyuv kares, because again, if there's a chiyuv kares according to Ula, I don't understand why you swap one isur kares for another. Unless you're going to say hold the ishtray. But the Brisa says ain't no kares. So what are you going to do with the Brisa? Do you follow my point? There are two ways of going here, and both of them take us to a brick wall to some extent. One way of taking it is that we're going to sacrifice one chiyuv for another chiyuv because one has kares and the other doesn't. But that's going to lead us to a brick wall because l'chora, according to Ula, we're dealing with an isur kares. If bia b'mikzah shmei bia. The other approach is to say that Ula would admit that in this case, even though bia b'mikzah shmei bia, but it's not a violation of any isur kares. And therefore we can opt in favor, tip the scale in favor of the korban pesach to avoid a violation of kares for the sake of a violation that's less than a chiyuv kares, even though bia b'mikzah shmei bia, but it's not shmei bia mamish, it's kiv bia. But now I'm stuck with a brick wall, so why do you need the svar of whole vishtray ish? Oh, and in fact, the Ula says ma'atam. Look at those two words. Ma'atam. Ma'atam means that they were matir this entire enterprise because it's mutar b'tzaras. And he's applying the principle of whole vishtray issue. But wait a minute, the Brisa says it's mutar because there's no chiyuv kares. So you're going to have to say that because there's no chiyuv kares, whereas in Pesach there is a chiyuv kares, that's why we're going to apply the principle of whole vishtray issue. But that's not satisfactory because we want to apply a whole Ishtere in the case of Achos Ish. There also is for the sake of the mitzvah Yibum. You follow my point? We're not going to say that every overlap of Eishes Ach and Achos Ishto, we're gonna make some sort of collapse between the two rayos and just treat it as one erev. No. We're only doing that for the sake of the mitzvah Yibum. And we're going to say the following, that once it's already revealed that you could be matir the Isser of Achos of Eishes Achi for the sake of Yibum, then the Torah would be willing to be matir the Isser Erev of Achos Ishto for the sake of Yibum. But whole Ishrei should be always seen within a broader perspective of some sort of mitzvah that's pushing us to apply whole Ishrei. You remember that we discussed many times the difference between hutra and dechuya? So what I'm saying is that whole Ishrei is a kind of a dechuya. It's not a hutra. It's not we're saying, well, magically the second Easter is gone because we were matir the first Easter. It doesn't work like that. You still have the second Easter to deal with. But the answer is that the Torah allowed me to apply whole Ishrei in the context of dechia, but in order to do that, I need some sort of greater purpose, an ultimate goal of a mitzvah. So that Ula's application of whole Ishrei in the case of a mitzvah who's a Balkari is based on the mitzvah of Karban Pesach. And applying that principle to Achos Ishto and Eishes Achiv, we're going to say for the greater good of the mitzvah of Yibum, we're going to apply the principle of whole Ishrei. I like it. I don't know if it's true. I can't tell you if what I said to you has even a shmek of emes to it. I honestly. Everything I said is purely speculative. But believe me, I'll try to work on it. Sunday I usually have a little bit more time than the rest of the week. And we'll see. Okay, then on both sides, we'll stop here.
All right.